Thank you for having us here today. It's really lovely to be a part of the Best for Baby 2 collaborative, and we always really enjoy these sessions, so it's nice to be able to share this work with everyone today. So quick introduction of us who we're here today to give a very quick presentation and then facilitate some group discussions as well. So my name is Beth Luxmore. I'm a clinical network manager and I work in perinatal and early years mental health for the clinical networks, which is part of NHS England. And joining me today are Kaizu, Ruth and Michael, who have all been part of this work to develop our parent, infant and early years relationships best practice model. So I just wanted to give a quick bit of background about how we got to where we are today. So the clinical networks exist to bring together expertise and stakeholders around a health issue or subject. And we work with clinicians, providers, commissioners and service users across the system to try and come together to share best practice and to also work across that wider geography area to try and level up services so that we have more equitable services across a wider patch. So we've been looking at parent, infant and early years relationships as part of the Perinatal Mental Health and Maternity Network since 2019. Since then, we've had a series of projects and events. So we've had some scoping work. We developed a best practice pathway, a few different engagement events online and in person. In 2022, as a result of a scoping report, we could see there was clearly work that needed to be done in terms to get our services more equitable across the North West Coast. But in order to do that, we didn't have a resource that we could use that was our model of best practice, our ambition, what we were aiming for. So in the absence of that existing nationally, we came together as a task and finish group to try and produce something that we could use locally, that we could agree was what we wanted to aim for as a system in terms of developing our services to support early years mental health. So I'll pause there just to make a quick note about the terminology that we use. In 0 to 5's mental health is how it's labelled or talked about in NHS long-term plan, but we have a very conscious decision to talk about relationships rather than mental health. So the reason that we do that is because an infant's mental health doesn't exist without its primary caregiver. So we always talk about relationships for the parent and infant, but we also really value relationships in all of the work that we do. We value the relationships that exist between our service users and people who are providing care to them, and we also really strongly value the relationships that exist between professionals working together in our network and in our collaborations. So once we'd identified this as a project and something that we needed to work on, we went about and set up our task and finish group. So they were working on this project for about 9 months in total, and we tried to make this group representative of the stakeholders that are really involved in this work. That task and finish group was feeding into a wider network group, our Parent, Infant and Early Years Relationship Network, which I know many people here are part of. That network meets every other month, and we share drafts and developments of the document with that wider group to get that wider system feedback. But another real key element of the work was our engagement approach and how we tried to reach out to families and service users in order to inform this work. And to tell you more about that, I'm going to hand you over to Kaizu, who is our lived experience lead.
Thanks, Mary. Hello, everybody. Hi. So from the outset, we were determined to be guided by the experience of families. The objective of the engagement work was to inform the guiding principles that underpin the service model by allowing us to understand the context within which families are currently sitting. And we recognised that simply by having one expert by experience, so that would be like me sitting in a meeting, probably wasn't going to give us the depth of understanding and experience that we really needed. So as you can see, I was appointed, but then we immediately went out and did an engagement piece, which included online survey, focus groups, and we were privileged to hear the voices of, you know, a couple of hundred parents through this. It was families. So it was a really well-received piece of work, and for that we were very grateful to our colleagues across the network actually for pushing that out and promoting it. It shows the power of working as a network. So we produced a summary report of the engagement findings, and it shaped the main service model. And I'll talk here we go, a little bit about what we heard from families now. So I'd like to say right up front, we acknowledge the fact that we were not able at this stage to understand the specific needs of individual communities. The next step in the work has been identified as grassroots co-production to appreciate how to implement relevant models at place, driven by local community needs. But at this stage, we were very much looking at the kind of big picture, the general sort of barriers, enablers, the things that, you know, what we were kind of testing things like proof of concept with families to understand better their experiences at a general level. So the data we collected did provide a really solid foundation from which to develop the service model and the guiding principles. And we weaved those family narratives that we heard throughout the final document, as well as producing a standalone report, so that when you read it, you're constantly being drawn back to the experience of the family as you read the best practice service model. So what did we hear from them? So we always like to draw it back to the families and what we hear from the families. So I will talk you through a little bit of what we heard from the families now. So they told us that they are comfortable being asked about their relationship with their child, and they would value support throughout the 0 to 5 period. So that gave us good guidance about, you know, the fact that this is not a 0 to 2 thing or a first year thing. This is a full 0 to 5 thing. However, we did find that the more worry they did have about their relationship, the less comfortable they were being asked about it. And when we explored this in focus groups, it became really apparent that that fear of stigma, that fear of being judged as a bad parent, is really high. And that, you know, parents are highly self-critical when it comes to identifying factors that hinder the development of positive relationships. They self-identify things that affect them, for example, their own mental health, to a greater extent than they would factor things like their child's behaviour. So just, you know, I won't throw loads of stats at you, but 53% of them said their own mental health was a factor, whereas only 38% said it was their child's behaviour. So there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of fear of judgment here. Informal sources of parenting support are highly utilised, but it's really important to know that that's not necessarily by preference. So parents are shying away sometimes from approaching NHS or third sector services because of that fear of stigma, but also of an assumption that services are too busy or too overwhelmed to be able to meet their needs, and sometimes just not being aware of what exists as well, actually. So they do also acknowledge that those informal sources of parenting support, you know, Dr. Google at 3 a.m, can cause more harm than good, and the families we spoke to certainly talked about resorting to social media and to the internet, and rather than necessarily really wanting to get their information from there. So the majority of respondents showed a clear preference for support in a non-clinical setting, and bearing in mind we were asking for like the moon on a stick version. We were like, what would really work for you? So probably unsurprisingly, a hybrid approach consisting of everything, depending on what they needed at a particular moment. So online, offline, group interventions, individual interventions was viewed as the absolute gold standard. Interestingly, the more vulnerable a family is, the less agency they have, and the greater there is the need for sort of that flexibility of approach and to tailor the approach at any given moment, rather than putting a family on a pathway and then them having it being like a sort of set of rail tracks, and that's, you know, what happens forever. So within that flexibility, however, you do need to have consistency, and families did report that whilst they understood sort of those necessary lapses in consistency around things like, you know, somebody might be on annual leave or somebody might, you know, be off sick, they were reporting kind of high levels of inconsistency around everything from, you know, admin stuff, bureaucratic things, all the way through to therapeutic approaches that were undermining their confidence and their trust in services and leading them to kind of disengage or not reach out in the first place. Opportunities to experience peer support. Peer support is talked about a lot in this context, and opportunities to experience peer support, both formal and informal, and families very much identified a difference between the two, and they meet different needs. were welcomed, but interestingly, volunteer peer support workers were definitely perceived as differently to paid PSWs in terms of how accessible it felt to speak to them, and going back to those ideas of stigma and judgment. So that is something to bear in mind when considering setting up services, is how your peer support, what your peer support offer looks like. And high visibility of services within the community is absolutely vital to build confidence. And I'm going to use a quote from a parent here because it explains better than I could. And what they said was, it's been really nice that the Children's Centre in their local area has been promoting this a lot more on Facebook recently. So every single day you're seeing what's coming up, and then they're putting up photographs of all the babies and what they're doing. And for people like myself who are a bit anxious and unsure, what am I going to be doing when I get there? Those pictures of saying, this is what you and your baby is going to be doing when you get here, and that's really good. And actually for her, that was the difference between her feeling confident to go or her staying at home. So, there was this thing about visibility. Physical and emotional accessibility. Now, physical accessibility might look like an easy self-referral process or co-location of services. And families had a lot to say about that, but they also had a lot to say about emotional accessibility. And this is about the language that's used, both in literature, both from staff members, everybody from the person who's on the door as you walk in, and the kind of thing that they might say. So this idea of being emotionally accessible. And targeted support for dads and non-birth partners came up, and I have to say it because I have to say it everywhere I go. So, and this was highlighted by both the dads and non-birth partners themselves and their partners, reflecting on how they might have needed it. And another brilliant quote sums this up. One of the focus group participants said to us, "When you hear parent, you just hear mum." So that's really important as well. If we can be sticking parents and families on all of our literature, but if our service users are reading that and hearing mothers and babies, then we're not communicating effectively. So one of the strongest messages that finally came through is this last one about the lack of confidence in parenting skills. Modern family circumstances have fundamentally undermined parents' confidences in the practical aspects of parenting and looking after children. And this has had a huge impact on bonding and attachment. Despite having access to more information than ever before, they feel isolated, confused, ill-informed. So much of the information is conflicting or contradictory. It's hard to work out what's a trusted source and what isn't. So relationships have been buried under the weight of all of this information and all of this kind of noise. And families find it incredibly hard to develop the trust that is required to feel safe and secure to reach out for help as a result. So we come back to relationships every time, isn't it? And those trusting relationships are key. So that's what we heard from our families. So how did we use that? Well, this is the model. So it shows the child at the centre, supported by the village. Oh, it's like I paid them, isn't it? That was perfect, on cue. So the child at the centre, commanding their space, surrounded by their village, which is necessarily their parents, caregivers, family and friends, who in turn are supported by universal services, to provide them with that universal support that they need. So everything in this model is designed to support relationships for the child, which in turn hopefully supports the child to grow up with good mental health. So when at times families in their villages need the targeted intervention of specialist services, you can see that Peers sits here amongst other specialist community services. And it's part of that suite of experts surrounding the family, but also building the capacity of the system to keep relationships in mind through the universal service. So in this way, you can see that peer services have a sort of dual role, a twin role, in supporting both the family and the system. So, and the family experience should then be one where they can move through the system according to their needs at any given time, with universal services and that access to peer support available throughout to provide the consistency and the security. So our guiding principles, you can see now that they draw really heavily, the guiding principles that support the model draw really heavily on the engagement work you've just heard about, particularly the emphasis on building trusting relationships, because we recognise from those conversations with the families that that trust is the primary facilitator of the access to the service. And it is around this principle in particular, the one about trusting relationships, that we're looking forward to kind of workshopping and doing some fun animal kind of adventures with you all in a short while, because we want to explore how those relationships feel here in your experience. You can also see the engagement work reflected in other principles, in particular the acknowledgement that that one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work for families. So we've put co-production at place with local families in there. the aspiration that the model is deeply integrated within the current health and social care system to create that continuity that families really need to feel safe, and the recognised importance of both flexibility and that physical, visible presence in communities. So I've got a couple of final slides for you, which are these are yours really, Michael, but you know, there you go, trust and relationships facilitator of service. Here we go. So we would invite you to consider the wider socio-political context of this work as we move into the workshop element. As our society becomes ever more individualistic, this in turn pushes our institutions and our services to adopt a more individualistic viewpoint themselves. Instead of viewing service users, and by this we are including entire families and those villages around them, in a holistic way, we break them down into the constituent sum of their parts and we treat those in isolation. This leads to services that, instead of working together to support every aspect, pull families in different directions with their own competing priorities, approaches and bureaucracies. So before I hand over to Michael and Ruth, who have, like I said, some work for you all today, I'd like to encourage you to sit a minute with the following reflections. Firstly, we believe that there is a profound need to harness the collective power of our systems via relationships in order to provide the care that families need. And that this is not about individual services working to develop in isolation to be the best that they can be at doing the little bit of the thing that they do. It's about entire systems that need to respond and flex to meet those variable and evolving needs of infants, young children and their caregivers. So, when you look at this colourful graphic, what do you currently see? Do you see lots of hands representing lots of different services, pulling families in different directions according to the bits that they're currently focused on? Or do you see lots of hands and services holding up the families in the centre and working together to provide them with the support that they need? We genuinely believe that by focusing on the quality of relationships, it can be possible to achieve the latter rather than the former. And that is the message that we're here to talk to you about today.
I was just looking at I was just looking at that slide. It's a little bit heterosexist, isn't it? And I'm also really worried about these two. Where are their caregivers? They're just they're at a party.
With all these guys.
Okay, a very straight party. Young carer being kind of like looked after by a balloon. Sorry, got distracted there.
No, I was just going to say, do you want to just pause for any kind of questions or reflections just before we go into the next bit? Claire, of course.
It's always me. I just think it's really important to keep saying the things that you're saying about what parents are telling us and about what good looks like. And that's all I want to say really is that somehow, even though, I mean, I thought that was wonderfully presented but also very familiar.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it isn't the first time I've heard that, but so somehow we have to keep talking about these things and how can we really build them into the way we deliver services. And I think that's one of the challenges, not just for this cohort, but my area of work is complex lives, and it's the same sort of issues. And how do we empower services to work together differently? And how do we retain that focus on relationships with each other and with the provider? So really important.
Thanks, Claire. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, hi. Just to come into the back of that, every single one of those arms represents a different service. And if you think about our world, I massively believe we've got to change how we incentivise our services to deliver. Because while ever we have different barriers and different purposes of services, we will always be pulling in different directions for political reasons, for budget reasons, for traded reasons. And we've really got to think carefully about how the service is set up universally in the middle first, to say that's their purpose and that's their job. And they're not here to go to that corner of Liverpool and not that one because they've got a budget and they haven't. And it causes massive barriers, but we're not transparent enough with that. And it really does. You've got to look at how we incentivise who's doing what and why.
Thank you. Thank you. I think there are challenges at every level of the system, from, kind of commissioning right down to, or maybe we could put commissioning at the bottom, right up to kind of communities. And this is, this model is what, as a family therapist, I'd call a hypothesis. It's an idea. It's a proposal. How, if it works in Liverpool, if it works in Everton, Anfield, Croxteth, Speke, wherever, is kind of down to us, down to you and other people, and obviously families as well. So this isn't us kind of saying this is what you should be doing. This is kind of a chance to kind of think, okay, if you like some of these ideas, or if you think this is a good direction of travel, and it's a direction of travel that maybe we've kind of like, we've been round, a number of times, but here we are again. Then let's think about how we could, what is in our gift to change. What are the things actually we need to kind of think about, contracts and commissioning and incentives and so on. But sometimes there are kind of quite informal things that can happen as well, in terms of like, shared training, for instance, and other opportunities. So today's really a chance to kind of like to look at where the barriers are, where the possibilities are, and what possibilities there might be.
Yeah. No, I was just reflecting on with as the system in a constant state of transformation and change, and just kind of recognizing and marking how hard that is wherever you are in the system. And it just feels important that everybody knows what a tough job it is. I think as well that there's the starting point is often that more certain place, like what have we got, that stock taking of services, what have we got, what do they look like, workforce counting, etc. But actually the bit that needs to run alongside that is looking at the kind of relationships between the different parts of the system. And I think that's what we really want to just hone in on today in the time that we've got together. I guess for me, the kind of organising questions are things like, how do we work together to create a better world in Liverpool? And what can we do together that we can't do alone? So they're the kind of guiding kind of frames for this session.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you want to
Say a bit more.
go into the exercise or tell people?
A bit about it, yeah. Yeah. So what we thought, I'll start. What we thought we would do was bring some of the real ways that we do work with families and do some of that together. So for that to be the kind of mechanism that we use and to guide our discussions today. So there are kind of some kind of guidelines, but they're not very strict either. So there'll be kind of lots of, so some of that will be created as the exercise unfolds. So what we're asking or inviting you to do is to get into groups. I don't know how many people we've got, but mixed groups, mixing up. So you're kind of representing, as Claire often says, like a bit of a slice of the system. And you won't have the complete system, but you'll have some of the different component parts. There's paper, there's animals, there's dinosaurs, there's whatever we could find in our kids' toy boxes on the tables in front of you. And I don't know if you want to say something about family sculpts and that kind of thing.
We could do.
Yeah,
So,
just to give the offices where it sits in the therapy and psychology.
so if you put the flip chart paper in the middle of the table, you might even want two pieces, and then you can place the animals. You could do it how you want to, but in a way you could come up with a two-dimensional map of babies, their caregivers, their siblings, families, and then services. You could use the distance apart to represent how accessible they are, both in terms of physical and emotional accessibility. Lovely point there, Kaisi. you could group services together that you think kind of collaborate more together, or kind of on opposite sides of the flip chart if you feel that they're not connected with each other. I don't want to kind of stifle your creativity, but also you can use the pens to do lines of connection, or dotted line, maybe where you feel that there isn't a connection but could be a stronger one. Maybe a jagged line if there's any relationships of antagonism or hostility. Again, I'll leave it to your creativity to illustrate.
I think what came out really strongly is that isolation is really prevalent within our communities, and that in order to be able to connect families with each other and with services, and services with services, we need to focus really a lot on community development, community engagement, and also a lot of the services are not aware still of what each other does actually provide or what could help, and can probably feel quite in isolation themselves, that they're dealing with a lot of the issues alone. So we think family hubs can help to bridge some of that gap and bring some of the services together and join them up a bit more.
Also, isolation. How do we connect people? How do we, because as services, we work as a different service. How do we connect each other so that we know what's around, so we know what's in the community, and so we can provide nurture to people that are isolated?
Well, I suppose the striking challenge was that we don't make it easy for health visitors, midwives, GPs to communicate with each other. And that because there's no shared records. So that makes it very difficult to know. So, and that's not good for the parents either, because they have to keep explaining. And in spite of the fact that they assume that every NHS professional knows what they've said before, the reality is that they don't. So that was one thing. The positive, I think, is that although it was difficult to identify who else, so if you're a health visitor and you're trying to work out who's the midwife that's working with the family that you're working with, and that's not simple, but that once that relationship is established, it's really positive, and that people do know how to work together and collaborate. We just don't make it easy for them.
One of the kind of really simple but quite shocking things was that Alice's team doesn't get early notification from Alder Hey if they have a complex needs child. It waits until it gets picked up by the health visitor at 2. It's just like, it just seems like a really bizarre thing that just doesn't happen. It's a real good example of 2 services just not talking together. And then the second thing, I think the kind of general thing was just the whole complexity of the system. You know, the relationships, the non-relationships, the kind of the barriers to, you know, if we talk about health visitors or children's centres, you know, someone might work well with one but not with another, and you know, there's all individuals within that, and it's a hugely complex system that we struggle to navigate. So for a parent, it's going to be even more difficult to navigate.
So my name is Emily, I'm a clinical psychologist. I work across Alder Hey CAMHS in the early years service, so the 0 to 5s, and then also the neonatal service across Alder Hey and Liverpool Women's. I think just because it fits across both of my roles so well, I just really wanted to get out there, meet people in the network. I know Michael from a bit of teaching on the course I've just finished as well, so yeah, just really wanted to get out there, network and meet people really. Absolutely, just because it fits with both of my roles, doesn't it? Both pockets in a very different way, but just thinking about how they piece together as well. I'm new in the neonatal service, so just thinking about how my 2 roles fit together, who I can meet across the services is just really important for me.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Rob from MamaFit. We deliver services during pregnancy for parents and for families living across Liverpool, Merseyside and Cheshire, supporting them to improve their health and well-being, think about their mental health, and connect with other local families and make new friends and form peer support groups. So I wanted to come just to for some networking opportunities, to find out a little bit more about the local landscape, what other services are available locally, how we can better work together to support the needs of local parents and families, to help them improve their mental health, to get them more active and just improve their overall general health and well-being, and support the system and help to provide a better place across Cheshire and Merseyside. Yeah, it's given us a real good insights available, what's available locally, some potential opportunities of how we can connect with other services, building some new relationships, and also being able to reaffirm about what it is that we do at MamaFit. A lot of the people we spoke to today were aware of MamaFit, but it was good to be able to meet these people in person and explain in a bit more detail about how we can support their aims and goals as well, and how we can complement the services that are available locally, and again help to maximise those outcomes for local people.
It does work coming here. It's so nice to be in a room with people rather than just being online and seeing people on a little square. It's so important just to connect, isn't it? And today's all been about building relationships between services, and I think we've done a little bit of that today on the ground. So yeah, it's exciting. I think that is my main takeaway, yeah, that it is just important to connect with everyone. We're such a vast service, aren't we? Loads of different services, loads of different trusts, all offering amazing things across Liverpool, and sometimes we just forget about that and work in our little silo, don't we? So yeah, that is my main takeaway.
Probably the main takeaway from us is that there's a lot of complex issues, and it is very much about everyone coming together and linking up, and true collaboration, integrating the system and supporting all these small and large organisations that are all working towards similar goals, how they can best link up, and how we can all come together to kind of raise awareness within the public, but also across services as well. So other services are available, what other services, and how we can achieve those referrals and signposting in between services to, again, give the parents and the families the best outcomes.